June 23, 1944, near the hedgerow country of Normandy, France. Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned over the engine compartment of a Sherman tank, listening carefully to the uneven rhythm of its idling engine. Around him, the men of the 761st Tank Battalion, one of the few African-American armored units in the European theater, were preparing for what they believed would be a routine support mission. The weather had finally cleared, promising optimal conditions for their advance. Williams was confident his skills as the battalion's chief mechanic would ensure every tank performed flawlessly. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What none of them knew was that the knowledge Isaiah Williams had gained years before on Georgia farmland would soon save not only their tanks, but the lives of dozens of men caught in one of the most treacherous terrains faced by American armor in France. The 761st Tank Battalion had arrived in Normandy 2 weeks after D-Day, part of the massive buildup of forces needed to break out of the beachhead. Unlike most African-American soldiers who were assigned to service and supply units, the men of the 761st were combat tankers, though they were still commanded by white officers, as was standard military practice at that time. Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams stood 5 feet 11 inches tall with powerful arms, developed through years of mechanical work. At 32 years of age, he was older than most of the men in his unit, a fact that earned him the nickname Pops, despite his youthful energy. Before the conflict, he had worked as a mechanic in Macon, Georgia, but his true education had come from growing up on a farm where he learned to keep ancient tractors running when replacement parts were non-existent. "Sergeant Williams, Colonel Harrington wants to see you," called Private First Class James Cooper, a lanky 19-year-old radio operator who had joined the unit just before they shipped overseas. "Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes," Williams replied, carefully tightening a fuel line clamp. "Just need to finish this adjustment or we'll have another tank breaking down mid-operation." The battalion headquarters was established in an old stone farmhouse about 2 miles behind the front lines. Inside, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Harrington stood over a map table, his weathered face tense as he studied the terrain ahead. At 45, Harrington was an experienced officer who had fought in the previous global conflict. Though initially skeptical when assigned to command an African-American tank battalion, he had quickly recognized the professionalism and skill of his men. "Sergeant Williams reporting, sir," Isaiah said, standing at attention. Harrington looked up. "At ease, Williams. We've got a situation developing. Intelligence reports the Germans have pulled back to establish a new defensive line, but they've left behind obstacles and prepared positions. Our advance tomorrow will take us through this area." He pointed to a section of the map marked by numerous small rectangular shapes. "Heavy hedgerows throughout. The infantry needs our support. But I'm concerned about how our tanks will perform in that terrain." "The hedgerows are a problem, sir," Williams acknowledged. "The Shermans weren't designed for that kind of ground. Those earthen berms can be 6 feet high with roots going back centuries. If we try to climb them straight on, we expose our underbellies, go through them, and we risk getting stuck." Colonel Harrington nodded. "Exactly my concern. The 29th Infantry Division is counting on our support. I understand you've been experimenting with some modifications to our tanks. Anything that might help us in this situation?" "Yes, sir. I've been studying the problem," Williams replied. "Reminds me of clearing new ground back in Georgia. The soil composition is different, but the principle is similar. With your permission, I'd like to modify at least one tank as a test. If it works, we can apply the changes to the entire company." "What exactly do you have in mind, Sergeant?" "A reinforced steel plow mount on the front, sir, similar to what we used on tractors to break hard ground. It would allow us to cut into the base of the hedgerow rather than trying to climb over it." Harrington considered for a moment. "How long would these modifications take?" "With enough welding equipment and hands, we could outfit an entire company in 48 hours. For a single test tank, give me 12 hours. "You have 6, Harrington said firmly. "Use whatever resources you need. If it works, we'll implement it across all frontline tanks immediately." Dismissed. As Williams left headquarters, he was already mentally cataloguing the materials he would need. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to prove that his unconventional knowledge had real battlefield applications. At the maintenance area, Williams gathered his team of mechanics. "Listen up, we've got 6 hours to modify Tank Charlie 37. I need cutting torches, welding equipment, and any spare steel plate you can find." Corporal Marcus Jenkins, Williams' right-hand man and a former Detroit auto worker, looked skeptical. 6 hours? What are we doing? Rebuilding the whole tank?" "Almost," Williams grinned. "We're giving it teeth." Through the night, Williams and his team worked tirelessly. They salvaged steel from destroyed equipment and even incorporated pieces from a damaged German Panzer they had recovered the week before. By dawn, Tank Charlie 37 sported a massive wedge-shaped steel blade welded to its front hull, angled to slice into the base of a hedgerow rather than attempt to climb over it. Captain Richard Lewis, commander of Charlie Company, approached as Williams was making final adjustments. "Colonel Harrington tells me you've transformed my tank into some kind of farm implement," he said, with a hint of amusement. Williams wiped grease from his hands. "Something like that, sir. This modification should allow you to breach the hedgerows without exposing your underbelly to anti-tank fire. And if it doesn't work, then I'll personally help push you out of whatever hole you get stuck in, sir." Lewis laughed. "Fair enough. The Colonel wants a demonstration at 0800 hours. Better make sure this contraption of yours performs as advertised." At precisely 8 o'clock, senior officers from the battalion gathered in a field behind their position, where a substantial hedgerow similar to those they would encounter in combat had been identified for testing. "Gentlemen," Colonel Harrington addressed the assembled officers, "Sergeant Williams has developed a modification that may solve our hedgerow problem. Captain Lewis will demonstrate." Inside Charlie 37, Captain Lewis gave the order to his driver, Corporal Frank Rodriguez. "Take us through nice and steady." The Sherman's 400-horsepower Continental radial engine roared as the tank lurched forward. As it approached the hedgerow, Rodriguez increased power. The improvised blade struck the base of the earthen berm and, remarkably, began to slice into it. For a moment, the tank's forward progress slowed, the engine straining against the ancient barrier. Then, with a shower of dirt and roots, Charlie 37 broke through, its blade carving a clean path through the obstacle. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the watching officers. Colonel Harrington turned to Williams with newfound respect in his eyes. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. Begin modifying all frontline tanks immediately. I'll arrange for additional welding equipment and materials." Over the next 36 hours, Williams supervised the modification of 38 Sherman tanks. His team worked in shifts, catching sleep when they could. The maintenance area resembled an industrial assembly line with cutting, welding, and mounting operations proceeding simultaneously on multiple vehicles. On the morning of June 26th, the 761st Tank Battalion moved into position to support the 29th Infantry Division's advance. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington had established his tactical headquarters in an abandoned church, its stone walls offering protection from artillery fire. Williams had been ordered to remain there, available to address any mechanical issues that might arise with the modified tanks. "First reports coming in, sir," the communications officer announced. "Charlie Company has successfully breached 3 hedgerows with minimal difficulty. Baker Company reports similar success." Harrington nodded with satisfaction. "And casualties?" "None so far, sir. The modified tanks are performing exceptionally well." Williams felt a surge of pride. His farm-inspired innovation was working exactly as he had envisioned, saving both equipment and lives. The feeling of triumph was short-lived. Just after noon, an urgent radio message came through from Able Company. "This is Able 6. We have encountered a different type of terrain. Multiple tanks bogged down in what appears to be a marsh concealed by vegetation. Grid coordinates Tango 479er, requesting immediate assistance, under fire from German artillery." Colonel Harrington turned to Williams. "Sergeant, take a recovery vehicle and assess the situation. Report directly to me what you find." "Yes, sir," Williams replied, already moving toward the door. Within minutes, Williams was in a half-track recovery vehicle speeding toward Able Company's position, accompanied by a small team of mechanics and a Sherman tank for protection. As they neared the coordinates, the sound of artillery fire grew louder, they found Able Company in disarray. 12 Sherman tanks were trapped in what appeared to be normal ground, but was actually a cleverly disguised marsh. The Germans had channeled water into a low-lying area and covered it with vegetation and a thin crust of soil, strong enough to support infantry but treacherous for 30-ton tanks. Now, with the American armor immobilized, German artillery was systematically targeting the stranded vehicles. Captain Harold Mitchell, Able Company's commander, rushed to Williams' vehicle as it pulled up behind a protective ridge. "Thank God you're here, Sergeant. We've lost all mobility. The tanks sink deeper every time they try to move. We've got men injured and the Germans have perfect targeting on our position." Williams surveyed the scene, his mind racing. This was unlike the hedgerow problem. No amount of brute force would extract the tanks from this quagmire. This required a different approach entirely. "Captain, I need to examine the ground conditions more closely," Williams said. "Can you provide covering fire? We'll do what we can, but make it quick. We've got wounded that need evacuation." Williams crawled forward to the nearest stranded tank, staying low to avoid the incoming artillery fire. He examined the ground around the vehicle, noting how the tracks had broken through a seemingly solid surface into a muddy substrate below. He collected samples of the soil in a canteen cup and made his way back to the recovery vehicle. After a brief examination, Williams approached Captain Mitchell. "Sir, this reminds me of something we called false bottom land back in Georgia. Looks solid, but it's just a crust over mud. Conventional recovery won't work. We'd just get the recovery vehicle stuck too. But I have an idea. I'm open to anything at this point, Sergeant." "We need to distribute the weight," Williams explained. "Back home, when tractors got stuck in this kind of ground, we'd lay down wooden planks or brush to create a makeshift roadbed. Do you have any engineer units nearby?" The 294th Combat Engineer Battalion is about 3 miles back, supporting the infantry advance. "Get them here with all the lumber they can transport," Williams said. "And I need every available infantryman to gather brush, small trees, anything that can be used to create a stable surface. We're going to build a corduroy road under these tanks." While waiting for the engineers, Williams directed his mechanics to begin unloading the equipment they had brought. "Jenkins, break out all the tow cables and chains. Rodriguez, get on the radio and request additional recovery vehicles, but tell them to hold position until I give the order to advance." Within an hour, trucks from the Engineer Battalion began arriving, loaded with lumber originally intended for bridge repairs and bunker construction. Williams coordinated with the Engineer Commander, Lieutenant Scott Wilson, explaining his plan. "We'll lay down a framework of logs and lumber around each tank, creating a stable platform," Williams said. "Then we'll use winches and cables to gradually ease the tanks onto these platforms. Once they're on solid footing, they can move under their own power to the nearest stable ground." "Ingenious," Lieutenant Wilson nodded, "but we'll be exposed the entire time." "That's why we need to work fast and in coordinated teams," Williams replied. 4 teams, 3 tanks each. We'll start with the tanks carrying wounded crew members." As the engineers and infantry began constructing the makeshift roadbeds, German artillery fire intensified. The enemy clearly understood that a recovery operation was underway and was determined to prevent it. Several shells landed close enough to shower Williams with dirt and debris, but he continued directing the operation, moving from team to team, making adjustments to the technique based on each tank's specific situation. Private First Class Cooper, who had volunteered to assist, worked alongside Williams. "Sergeant, how did you know this would work?" he asked as they unspooled a heavy tow cable. "When I was 12, Williams replied, securing the cable to a winch point. "My father's tractor got stuck in a field after heavy rain. We were too poor to lose that tractor, so we figured out how to save it. Sometimes the solutions to the biggest problems come from the simplest experiences." By late afternoon, they had successfully extracted 4 tanks, but the operation was taking longer than Williams had hoped. German artillery fire remained consistent, and they had suffered casualties among the engineers and infantry providing assistance. The remaining 8 tanks seemed to be sinking deeper as the marshy ground, disturbed by the recovery efforts, became increasingly unstable. Williams gathered the team leaders for a hasty conference behind the relative safety of an already recovered tank. "We need to modify our approach," he said. "The ground is deteriorating faster than we can build our platforms. Lieutenant Wilson, do your engineers have any explosives?" Standard demolition charges, yes. What are you thinking? We need to drain this area, Williams explained. From what I've observed, there's a natural slope toward that tree line to the east. If we can breach the soil layer in the right places, we might be able to channel enough water away to firm up the ground. It was a risky strategy. The explosives would temporarily make their position even more visible to German observers, likely increasing the artillery response. But if it worked, it could save hours of grueling labor and potentially reduce casualties in the long run. Colonel Harrington, who had arrived to observe the operation firsthand, gave his approval. Do it, Sergeant, but be aware that Division Headquarters is getting impatient. They need these tanks operational by tomorrow morning for the continued advance. Under Williams' direction, the engineers placed carefully calculated demolition charges along a line leading from the marshy area toward lower ground. When all personnel were at a safe distance, they detonated the charges. The explosions sent geysers of mud and water into the air, creating a visible channel across the boggy terrain. For several tense minutes, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, water began flowing along the newly created drainage path. Within an hour, the standing water around the tanks had noticeably decreased. "It's working!" Lieutenant Wilson exclaimed. "The ground is already firming up." Williams nodded, but remained focused on the next phase. "Let's resume the extraction while the Germans adjust their artillery. They'll need to recalibrate after those explosions confused their observers." As predicted, the German artillery fire temporarily slackened, then resumed with less accuracy. Taking advantage of the improved conditions and reduced fire, Williams' teams worked with renewed energy. By nightfall, they had recovered 10 of the 12 tanks. The remaining 2 were the most deeply mired and would require additional equipment. Colonel Harrington approached Williams as darkness fell, necessitating a pause in operations due to the danger of working with heavy equipment without adequate light. "Impressive work, Sergeant. Division will be pleased that most of the tanks can participate in tomorrow's operation. We'll need to leave those last 2 for now." Williams respectfully disagreed. "Sir, with all due respect, we can extract those last 2 tanks tonight. I've worked on farm equipment in darkness many times. If you can authorize some additional lighting equipment and provide security, we can have all 12 tanks operational by dawn." Harrington studied Williams' face in the gathering darkness, noting the determination in his eyes. "You're that confident?" "Yes, sir. Those men risked their lives following our orders into that marsh. We owe it to them to recover their equipment." After a moment's consideration, Harrington nodded. "Very well, Sergeant. You have until 0400 hours. After that, we move with whatever we've got." Throughout the night, working under carefully shielded lights to avoid providing targets for German artillery, Williams supervised the extraction of the final 2 tanks. The operation required all the skill and improvisation he had developed over years of mechanical work. By 3:30 in the morning, exhausted but triumphant, Williams watched as the last Sherman tank crawled out of the marsh under its own power. Captain Mitchell approached, offering a canteen of water. "I don't know how to thank you, Sergeant. You saved my company, and quite possibly the entire operation." Williams took a grateful sip. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Mitchell said firmly. "What you did goes far beyond your job description. I'll be making a formal commendation to Colonel Harrington." By dawn, the 12 recovered tanks had been inspected, serviced, and declared combat ready. Remarkably, only 2 required major repairs, a testament to both the durability of the Sherman tank and the skill with which Williams and his team had conducted the recovery operation. As the tanks of Able Company moved out to rejoin the battalion for the morning's advance, Williams stood watching, fatigue evident in every line of his body. He had been awake for nearly 48 hours, working continuously under enemy fire to accomplish what many had deemed impossible. Colonel Harrington appeared beside him. "You should get some rest, Sergeant. You've earned it." Williams shook his head. "Not yet, sir. Those tanks will need maintenance after today's operation. My team and I should be ready." Harrington smiled. "That's an order, Sergeant. Get 4 hours of sleep. Consider it a military necessity. I need you functioning at full capacity." "Yes, sir," Williams finally conceded. As Williams made his way to the designated rest area, Private Cooper fell into step beside him. Sergeant, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about solutions coming from simple experiences. Do you think the Army realizes how valuable those kinds of experiences are? Williams considered the question carefully. The Army is learning, Cooper. This conflict is teaching everyone that victory depends not just on equipment and numbers, but on innovation and adaptation. The knowledge a man brings from civilian life, whether it's from a farm in Georgia or an auto plant in Detroit, that knowledge matters. You think things will be different for us after the war? For colored soldiers, I mean. It was a profound question, touching on hopes and uncertainties that many African-American servicemen carried with them. Williams had seen both the entrenched prejudices that limited opportunities for black soldiers and the gradual, grudging recognition of their contributions. I believe this war is changing things, Cooper. Not as fast as we might hope, but change is coming. Men like Colonel Harrington, who might never have worked with colored soldiers before, are seeing what we can do. And we're proving ourselves every day, not just to them, but to ourselves. He paused, looking back at the tanks moving toward the front lines, tanks that would have been lost without his knowledge and leadership. The most important thing is that we keep doing our best. Excellence can't be denied forever. As Williams finally lay down to rest, his mind drifted back to his father's farm in Georgia, where he had first learned to solve problems with limited resources and unlimited determination. He couldn't have imagined then that those lessons would one day save American tanks on a battlefield in France. Yet here he was, his seemingly ordinary knowledge proving extraordinary in the crucible of conflict. The next day would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply his unique skills. For now, though, Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. In the greatest conflict the world had ever known, his contribution mattered. And perhaps, just perhaps, it would help pave the way for changes that would extend far beyond the battlefields of Europe. What neither Williams nor anyone else in the 761st Tank Battalion yet realized was that their breakthrough at the disguised marsh would become a critical turning point in the campaign. The recovered tanks would soon play a pivotal role in an operation that would fundamentally alter the course of the Allied advance. And Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams would find himself facing even greater challenges that would test not only his mechanical ingenuity, but his leadership and courage in ways he could not yet imagine. In a small church converted to a field hospital near the front lines, Staff Sergeant Raymond Turner lay on a cot, his left arm heavily bandaged. As the battalion's maintenance officer, he had been working alongside Williams when an artillery shell had landed too close, peppering him with shrapnel. Now, as medical personnel moved efficiently among the wounded, Turner dictated a letter to a Red Cross volunteer. Technical Sergeant Williams demonstrated exceptional ingenuity and courage under fire, he said, choosing his words carefully. His unique application of civilian agricultural knowledge to military vehicle recovery resulted in the preservation of 12 M4 Sherman tanks, valued at approximately $1,700,000. But more importantly, saved the lives of 37 American tankers who would otherwise have been lost. The volunteer, a middle-aged woman named Eleanor Pembroke, looked up from her notepad. "That's quite a commendation, Sergeant. Is this for an official report?" Turner shook his head. "No, ma'am, this is a personal letter to my congressman. Men like Williams deserve recognition, and I intend to make sure they get it." As the morning sun rose higher over the Norman countryside, the 761st Tank Battalion continued its advance, their modified Shermans cutting through hedgerows that had stymied other units. And somewhere behind the lines, Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams slept, unaware that his actions over the past 48 hours would soon become the stuff of legend within the unit, and perhaps, eventually, beyond. The recovered tanks rejoined the battalion's advance, now making steady progress through the difficult hedgerow country. Colonel Harrington had ordered the implementation of Williams's hedgerow cutting modifications across all remaining tanks, creating a formidable armored force capable of overcoming the terrain that had previously favored the defenders. As the battalion pushed forward, supporting infantry units reported significantly reduced casualties, thanks to the tank's new ability to breach hedgerows without exposing their vulnerable undersides to anti-tank fire. By midday, Williams had rejoined the battalion's forward maintenance unit, establishing a mobile repair post just behind the advancing companies. Despite his fatigue, he worked methodically, directing his team as they addressed the inevitable mechanical issues that arose during combat operations. Sergeant Williams called a runner from headquarters. "Colonel Harrington requests your immediate presence at the command post." Williams wiped his hands on a rag. "Jenkins, take over here. I'll be back as soon as I can." The battalion command post had been established in an abandoned farm building, its thick stone walls providing protection from artillery and small arms fire. Inside, Williams found Colonel Harrington conferring with Captain David Morrison, the battalion intelligence officer. "Sergeant Williams reporting as ordered, sir." Harrington looked up from the map table. "Williams, we've received some concerning intelligence. Captain Morrison, please brief Sergeant Williams." Morrison, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, pointed to a section of the map marked with red pencil. "Aerial reconnaissance has identified what appears to be a German tank repair facility in this area, approximately 7 miles from our current position. Intelligence suggests they're converting damaged Panzerfes and Tigers to fixed defensive positions, essentially buried tanks used as bunkers. If accurate, this represents a significant threat to our advance." Harrington continued, "Division wants this facility neutralized, but they can't spare any air support for at least 48 hours. They've tasked us with handling it." Williams studied the map. "What's the terrain like in that area, sir?" "That's part of the problem," Morrison replied. "It's heavily wooded with limited approach routes. Satellite photos suggest the Germans have mining equipment they're using to position the tanks. They're creating interlocking fields of fire, covering all likely avenues of approach." Harrington looked directly at Williams. "I need your assessment. Given what we know about their armor and our current capabilities, what are we facing if we go up against these modified defensive positions?" Williams considered carefully before responding. "Sir, a buried tank has several advantages as a defensive position. The hull is protected, leaving only the turret exposed, which significantly reduces the target profile. Our 75mm guns can penetrate Panzer IV armor at normal combat ranges, but with reduced target area and the possibility of additional improvised armor protection, effectiveness would be significantly reduced." "And against Tigers?" Harrington pressed. "The Tiger's frontal armor is too thick for our 75mm guns to penetrate reliably even under optimal conditions, as fixed positions with only the turrets exposed." Williams let the implication hang in the air. Harrington nodded grimly. "That's my assessment as well. A frontal assault would be extremely costly." "If I may ask, sir, why are you consulting me on tactical matters? I'm a maintenance sergeant." "Because, Sergeant Williams, you've demonstrated an ability to find unconventional solutions to difficult problems. Before I commit men to what could be a very costly operation, I want to explore all options." Harrington hesitated, then added, "And frankly, your performance over the past few days has earned you the right to be heard." Williams felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about mechanical ingenuity anymore. Lives would depend on his input. He studied the map more carefully, noting the contours of the land, the placement of roads, and the location of waterways. "Sir, rather than approaching this as a conventional tank versus tank engagement, what if we consider it a problem of terrain and mobility, like the marsh and the hedgerows?" Harrington leaned forward, interested. "Go on. The Germans are creating fixed positions, sacrificing mobility for protection. If we can't defeat their armor directly, perhaps we can use the terrain against them." Williams pointed to a small river marked on the map near the German position. "What's the condition of this waterway?" Morrison consulted his notes. "Normally just a small stream, but recent rainfall has raised the water level considerably. Local intelligence reports it's running about 3 feet deep currently." "And what's the elevation of the German position relative to the stream?" "According to topographical data, their position is approximately 15 to 20 feet above the stream level." Williams' mind raced with possibilities. "Sir, I think there might be a way to neutralize those positions without a direct assault, but it would require engineering support and some equipment not normally used in combat operations." For the next hour, Williams outlined a plan that drew on his knowledge of drainage, soil composition, and the principles of hydraulic pressure. By the end, Even the skeptical Captain Morrison was nodding in agreement. "It's unorthodox," Harrington admitted, "but it has merit. I'll present it to Division Headquarters and request the necessary support. In the meantime, begin preliminary preparations. If approved, we'll need to move quickly." As Williams left the command post, he felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. His expertise was now being applied not just to recovering equipment, but to planning offensive operations. It was a responsibility he had never anticipated when he joined the service, but one he now embraced fully. What would unfold in the coming days would test not only his technical knowledge, but also his leadership and courage under fire. Challenges that would transform both the battlefield and the man himself in ways no one could have predicted. 2 days later, Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams stood beside Colonel Harrington as they observed the German tank repair facility through binoculars from a concealed position approximately 1 mile away. Division Headquarters had approved the operation, providing the requested engineering support and equipment. Now, as dawn broke over the Norman countryside, Williams watched as the final preparations were made. "Everything in position, Sergeant?" Harrington asked quietly. Williams nodded. "Yes, sir. The engineering teams finished setting up the water pumps and piping during the night. The diversionary force is ready on the western approach. All we need now is your order to begin." The plan they had developed was unlike any conventional military operation. Rather than attacking the German positions directly, they would use the nearby stream to undermine them, literally. High-volume water pumps, normally used by engineering battalions for bridge construction and road maintenance, had been positioned upstream. These would dramatically increase the water flow toward a series of channels the engineers had excavated during the night, directing the water into the ground beneath and around the German positions. "It's remarkable how much this resembles dealing with flooding back in Georgia," Williams commented. "When the river would rise, we'd sometimes have to divert water to prevent it from washing away our crops. This is just the reverse, using water intentionally to destabilize the ground." Harrington studied the German position through his binoculars. "They've positioned 7 tanks as fixed emplacements, just as intelligence reported, 4 Panzer IVs and 3 Tigers, partially buried with only their turrets and upper hulls exposed. Excellent defensive position under normal circumstances." "Water is patient, sir," Williams replied. "It finds every weakness, every seam. Those tanks may be able to resist our shells, but they can't fight geology." At precisely 0700 hours, Harrington gave the order to begin. The diversionary force, a company of Sherman tanks from another battalion temporarily attached to the 761st, began firing smoke shells toward the German position from maximum range, creating the impression of an imminent frontal assault. German artillery immediately responded, concentrating fire on the perceived threat. Meanwhile, the water pumps began operating at full capacity, forcing thousands of gallons per minute into the carefully prepared channels. For nearly an hour, nothing visible happened. The diversionary force continued to lay down smoke, occasionally firing high explosive shells to maintain the deception that a conventional attack was being prepared. Then, a sentry reported the first sign of success. "Movement at position 3. The ground around the easternmost panzer is shifting." Williams and Harrington turned their binoculars toward the indicated position. Sure enough, the earth around one of the buried Panzer IVs was visibly slumping as the water saturated the soil beneath it, creating an unstable slurry that could no longer support the tank's weight. Over the next 30 minutes, the process accelerated. One by one, the buried tanks began to shift, their carefully prepared positions compromised as the ground literally dissolved beneath them. 2 of the panzers tilted dramatically, their guns no longer able to maintain their aimed positions. One of the Tigers, weighing over 56 tons, sank several feet into the liquefied soil, its turret now partially obstructed by the surrounding earth. "It's working exactly as you predicted," Harrington said with undisguised admiration. "Yes, sir," Williams replied. "But this is just phase 1. Now comes the complicated part. As the German positions continued to deteriorate, frantic activity could be observed as enemy soldiers attempted to stabilize the sinking tanks. Maintenance vehicles and equipment were brought forward, exposing them to fire from the American forces. "They're doing exactly what I would in their position," Williams observed. "Trying to shore up the tanks with timbers and anything else they can find, but they're fighting a losing battle against basic physics." Harrington raised his radio. "All units, execute Phase 2. The diversionary force ceased its smokescreen and began precise targeting of the now exposed German maintenance equipment and support vehicles. At the same time, a company of M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, which had been positioned during the night, opened fire on the increasingly vulnerable German positions. The combination of precise artillery fire and the continuing degradation of the ground beneath the German tanks created chaos within the repair facility. Without stable firing platforms, the German tanks could not effectively return fire. Maintenance vehicles attempting to reach the stranded tanks became stuck in the increasingly muddy terrain. By mid-afternoon, what had begun as an apparently impregnable defensive position had been transformed into a disorganized collection of stranded vehicles and equipment. White flags began to appear as German maintenance personnel and tank crews surrendered, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Colonel Harrington turned to Williams with a broad smile. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. Division will be extremely pleased. This position could have cost us hundreds of casualties if we'd attempted a conventional assault." Williams nodded, but his expression remained serious. "Thank you, sir. But we should move quickly to secure those tanks. Even disabled, they represent valuable intelligence, especially the Tigers." "Agreed. I'll order Baker Company forward to secure the area and begin recovery operations." Harrington paused, studying Williams thoughtfully. "I'd like you to personally supervise the technical assessment of the captured equipment. Your insights have proven invaluable so far." Over the next 24 hours, Williams led a team of mechanics and intelligence personnel in examining the captured German tanks. The information they gathered about armor thickness, engine performance, and mechanical vulnerabilities would prove extremely valuable to Allied forces throughout the European theater. 2 days later, Williams was summoned to division headquarters, an unusual honor for a non-commissioned officer. There he found himself in the presence of not only Colonel Harrington, but also Brigadier General Walter Maxwell, the division commander. "Sergeant Williams," General Maxwell began, "Colonel Harrington has briefed me thoroughly on your contributions over the past week. The hedgerow modifications, the marsh recovery operation, and now this innovative approach to neutralizing fixed tank positions all originated from your unique expertise." Williams stood at attention. "Thank you, sir. I was just applying what I knew to the problems at hand." "That's precisely the point, Sergeant. Your background knowledge that might have been dismissed as irrelevant to modern mechanized warfare, has proven extraordinarily valuable." The general picked up a folder from his desk. "I've reviewed your service record. Before joining the 761st, you were rejected by 3 separate tank training programs, despite scoring exceptionally well on mechanical aptitude tests." Williams remained silent. The rejections had been painful, but not surprising given the military's policies regarding African-American servicemen at that time. "Those rejections represent a failure of imagination on the part of the Army," General Maxwell continued, surprising Williams with his candor. "We've been too rigid in our thinking about what constitutes valuable military knowledge. Your success demonstrates that practical experience, regardless of its source, can be as important as formal military training." Colonel Harrington stepped forward. "With the General's approval, I'm establishing a special technical unit within the battalion, focused on vehicle recovery, terrain management, and adaptive engineering. I'd like you to lead it, with a promotion to Master Sergeant." Williams was momentarily speechless. Such an assignment and promotion for an African-American soldier was virtually unprecedented. Additionally, General Maxwell added, "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star for your actions during the marsh recovery operation. Your courage under fire saved both men and essential equipment at a critical juncture in our campaign." "I don't know what to say." "Sir," Williams managed finally. "Say you'll accept the promotion and the new assignment," Harrington urged. "We need your expertise now more than ever as we push deeper into enemy territory." "Of course, sir. I'm honored to accept." As Williams left division headquarters, his mind whirled with the implications of what had just occurred. The promotion and recognition were personally gratifying, but more significant was the acknowledgement of the value of his knowledge rooted in experiences far removed from conventional military training. Over the following weeks, Williams's newly formed technical unit became an integral part of the 761st Tank Battalion's operations. Composed of men selected for their practical mechanical experience rather than traditional military qualifications, the unit developed innovative solutions to the challenges of operating armor in the varied terrain of France and later Germany. Williams' team refined the hedgerow cutting modifications, creating a standardized design that was eventually adopted by other armored units. They developed new recovery techniques for tanks damaged or stranded in difficult terrain, and they continued to apply unconventional approaches to tactical problems, drawing on their diverse civilian experiences. By late August, the Allied breakout from Normandy was well underway, and the 761st Tank Battalion found itself advancing rapidly eastward as part of the general offensive. The countryside had changed from the enclosed hedgerow country to more open terrain, presenting new challenges and opportunities. On August 25th, Williams was inspecting a column of tanks preparing for the next day's advance when Colonel Harrington approached, accompanied by a correspondent from Stars and Stripes, the military newspaper. "Sergeant Williams, this is Lieutenant Jonathan Parker," Harrington introduced. "He's writing a series of articles about technical innovations in the field. I thought he might be interested in your unit's work." Lieutenant Parker, a slender man with a perpetually curious expression, extended his hand. "Colonel Harrington has been singing your praises, Sergeant. I'd like to hear more about how you've been applying civilian knowledge to military problems." Williams hesitated. He had never sought publicity and was acutely aware of the complexities of being an African-American soldier in the spotlight. Reading his hesitation, Parker added, "This isn't just about human interest, Sergeant. The techniques you've developed could save lives across the entire European theater if they're more widely known." Put that way, Williams couldn't refuse. For the next hour, he explained the technical challenges they had overcome, from the hedgerow modifications to the marsh recovery operation to the undermining of the German fixed tank positions. Parker took copious notes. "This is fascinating stuff, Sergeant. There's a common thread in all these solutions. They're elegant in their simplicity. You're not using exotic technology or complex engineering. You're applying basic principles in creative ways. That's necessity, Lieutenant. On a farm, you learn to solve problems with whatever's available. You can't always wait for the perfect part or the ideal tool. And that mentality translates perfectly to battlefield conditions," Parker observed. "I think there's an important lesson here for the military as a whole." Williams shrugged. "I'm just doing my job." "With respect, Sergeant, you're doing considerably more than that. You're challenging conventional thinking about how we approach battlefield obstacles." Parker closed his notebook. "I think this story will resonate with a lot of people, not just in the military." 2 weeks later, a copy of Stars and Stripes reached the 761st Tank Battalion. On the front page was an article titled "Farm Knowledge Saves Tanks: How a Georgia Mechanic's Ingenuity is Changing Battlefield Tactics." Accompanying the article was a photograph of Williams standing beside a Sherman tank equipped with his hedgerow modification. The article described in detail the innovations Williams had developed, carefully explaining the technical aspects while emphasizing the broader implications for military operations. It noted that Williams's techniques had been adopted by other units and were being incorporated into training programs for maintenance and recovery personnel. Most significantly, the article explicitly acknowledged that Williams' background as an African-American farm mechanic, experiences that might have been dismissed as irrelevant to modern warfare, had proven invaluable in overcoming some of the most challenging obstacles faced by American armor in the European theater. The reaction within the battalion was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Men who had worked with Williams already respected his technical abilities. Now they saw him as something of a celebrity. White officers who had initially been skeptical of African-American soldiers serving in combat roles found themselves reconsidering long-held assumptions. Colonel Harrington summoned Williams to his office shortly after the article appeared. "Quite a write-up, Sergeant. How does it feel to be famous?" Williams smiled slightly. A bit uncomfortable, sir. I'm not used to that kind of attention. Well, you deserve the recognition, but that's not why I called you here. Harrington handed him a folder. Division has received reports of a new type of German anti-tank emplacement along our expected route of advance. They're using concreted positions with drainage systems, specifically designed to prevent the kind of flooding technique we used successfully last month. They're adapting to our methods, Williams observed, studying the intelligence reports. Exactly, and we need to adapt in response. I'd like your team to develop countermeasures. You have 3 days before the advance continues. For the next 72 hours, Williams and his technical unit worked tirelessly, analyzing the German defensive preparations and developing potential solutions. They constructed scale models, conducted soil tests, and experimented with various approaches. The solution they ultimately devised combined engineering, chemistry, and Williams' knowledge of how different soils respond to various treatments. Rather than attempting to flood the German positions, they would target the drainage systems themselves, using a mixture of quick-setting concrete and expanding chemical compounds to obstruct the carefully constructed channels. Without functional drainage, the concrete emplacements would become vulnerable to the same hydrological forces Williams had previously exploited, but from rainfall rather than artificially directed water flow. On September 12th, the technique was implemented against a German defensive line near the French-Belgian border. The results exceeded even Williams' expectations. Within 48 hours of applying the concrete chemical mixture to identified drainage points, heavy rainfall transformed the supposedly impregnable German positions into a quagmire. The subsequent American advance encountered significantly less resistance than anticipated, with many German units withdrawing rather than fighting from compromised positions. Following this success, Williams found himself increasingly involved in operational planning, his technical expertise now recognized as a valuable strategic asset. Colonel Harrington regularly consulted him on terrain-related challenges, and his recommendations were forwarded to division and even corps level. By early October, the 761st Tank Battalion had advanced into Belgium, encountering new terrain and weather conditions that presented fresh challenges for armored operations. The autumn rains had transformed much of the countryside into muddy terrain that tested the mobility of tanks and support vehicles alike. During this period, Williams continued to refine and adapt his techniques, drawing on his expanding knowledge of European soil conditions and agricultural practices. He established communication with local Belgian farmers, learning from their generations of experience with the land and incorporating their insights into his approach to terrain management. On October 21st, near a small Belgian village, the battalion encountered a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. The only bridge capable of supporting tanks across a critical river had been destroyed by retreating German forces. Military engineers estimated it would take at least 5 days to construct a replacement sturdy enough for the Shermans. Division headquarters, pressing for continued rapid advance, was unwilling to accept such a delay. Colonel Harrington turned to Williams. "Any ideas, Sergeant? We need to get across that river within 48 hours to maintain the timetable." Williams studied the river and the surrounding terrain carefully. "Sir, I notice there are several stone farm buildings nearby that have been damaged by artillery. With your permission, I'd like to examine them." After inspecting the structures, Williams returned with an unexpected proposal. "Sir, those buildings are constructed from limestone blocks, each weighing approximately 200 pounds. If we dismantle them systematically, we could use those blocks to create a ford across the river at its narrowest point." "A ford? For 30-ton tanks?" Harrington was skeptical. "Yes, sir. The river bottom at that location is relatively firm, gravel rather than mud. If we create a properly designed foundation of limestone blocks, it should support the tank's weight sufficiently to allow crossing. It won't be a permanent solution, but it doesn't need to be." Though dubious, Harrington authorized the attempt, having learned to trust Williams' unorthodox approaches. For the next 36 hours, Williams directed a combined force of engineers, infantrymen, and his own technical unit in dismantling the damaged buildings and precisely placing the limestone blocks to create a submerged causeway across the river. On the morning of October 23rd, The first Sherman tank cautiously approached the improvised ford. As Williams had predicted, the limestone foundation held. By nightfall, the entire battalion had successfully crossed, maintaining the advanced timetable that division headquarters had deemed essential. This achievement attracted attention at the highest levels of command. Reports of the improvised river crossing reached First Army headquarters, where General Courtney Hodges personally noted the innovative solution in his daily briefing. As autumn gave way to winter, the Allied advance continued. Despite increasingly difficult weather conditions and stiffening German resistance, Williams and his technical unit were kept busy developing solutions to cold weather operation problems, from preventing fuel lines from freezing to maintaining traction on icy roads. In early December, the 761st Tank Battalion was withdrawn from the front lines for rest, refit, and incorporation of new replacement personnel and equipment. During this period, Williams was surprised to receive orders to report to First Army headquarters. Upon arrival, he was ushered into a conference room where several high-ranking officers were reviewing operational maps and reports. Among them was Major General James Williams, no relation, the commander of First Army's Armored Division units. "Sergeant Williams," the general acknowledged him, "your reputation precedes you. I've been following your work with considerable interest, particularly your solutions to terrain and mobility challenges." "Thank you, sir," Williams replied, standing rigidly at attention. "At ease, Sergeant. I've asked you here because we're facing a significant challenge, and conventional approaches have proven inadequate." The general pointed to a large-scale map of the Ardennes forest region. "Intelligence indicates the Germans may be planning a major counter-offensive in this area. The terrain is heavily forested, with limited road networks, and winter conditions are making movement increasingly difficult." For the next hour, Williams participated in a detailed discussion of potential mobility solutions for armored units in the challenging Ardennes environment. His suggestions, rooted in his understanding of how farm vehicles operated in similar conditions, were met with thoughtful consideration from officers who would normally have dismissed the ideas of a non-commissioned officer, particularly an African-American one. As the meeting concluded, General Williams pulled him aside. "Your contribution today was invaluable, Sergeant. I'm recommending that you be temporarily attached to First Army headquarters as a technical consultant on mobility issues. Colonel Harrington has already approved the transfer." The assignment to First Army headquarters marked a new chapter in Williams' military service. Working with senior planning officers, he helped develop strategies for maintaining armored mobility in the difficult winter conditions of the Ardennes. His practical knowledge complemented the formal military education of the staff officers, creating solutions that neither could have developed independently. On December 16th, the Germans launched their anticipated counter-offensive, what would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge. The initial attack caught American forces by surprise, creating confusion and threatening to break through Allied lines. In the chaotic early days of the offensive, Williams found himself thrust into an unexpected role. With headquarters staff struggling to coordinate responses to rapidly changing battlefield conditions, his expertise in vehicle mobility under adverse conditions became crucial for planning countermoves and relief operations. Working around the clock, Williams helped identify alternative routes for armor reinforcements, developed techniques for recovering vehicles stranded in snow and mud, and created improvised methods for improving traction on icy roads. His recommendations, based on principles he had applied on Georgia farms decades earlier, were implemented across multiple units, helping to stabilize the situation as the Allied response gathered momentum. By Christmas Day, the tide had begun to turn. American forces had halted the German advance and were beginning to counterattack. Williams returned to the 761st Tank Battalion, which had been rushed into action as part of the Allied response. Colonel Harrington greeted him warmly. "Welcome back, Sergeant. I hear you've been making quite an impression at headquarters." "Just trying to help however I can, sir." "Well, your contributions haven't gone unnoticed. I received a personal note from General Williams commending your service." Harrington handed him an envelope. "This came for you as well." Inside was a letter from the editor of the Stars and Stripes, informing Williams that the article about his innovations had been picked up by several major American newspapers, including the New York Times and the Chicago Defender, a prominent African-American newspaper. "You're becoming something of a symbol, Sergeant," Harrington observed, "a demonstration of what's possible when talent is recognized regardless of background." Williams considered this thoughtfully. "I never set out to be a symbol, sir. I just wanted to do my job. Sometimes doing your job exceptionally well makes you a symbol whether you intend it or not," Harrington replied. "The Army is changing, Williams. Slowly, perhaps, but changing nonetheless. Men like you are helping to drive that change." As the harsh winter of 1944 to 1945 gave way to spring, the Allied forces pushed steadily eastward into Germany itself. The 761st Tank Battalion, with Williams' technical unit continuing to develop innovative solutions to battlefield challenges, participated in this final phase of the European campaign. Williams' reputation continued to grow, both within the military and, increasingly, in the civilian world back home. Additional articles appeared in various publications, highlighting not just his technical innovations, but also the broader significance of his achievements as an African-American soldier in a still segregated military. On April 12, 1945, Williams received notification that he had been awarded the Bronze Star for his actions during the Marsh recovery operation the previous June. The accompanying citation specifically noted his exceptional technical knowledge, leadership, and courage under fire, resulting in the recovery of valuable equipment and the saving of numerous lives. The award ceremony, held at battalion headquarters, was attended not only by the unit's officers and men, but also by representatives from division and corps-level commands. Colonel Harrington, now promoted to Brigadier General, presided over the ceremony. Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams exemplifies the very best traditions of the United States Army, Harrington declared as he presented the medal. His unique combination of civilian expertise and military discipline has saved countless lives and contributed significantly to our successes in the European theatre. Following the ceremony, Williams found himself surrounded by well-wishers, including many of the tank crew members he had helped rescue from the marsh nearly a year earlier. Captain Mitchell, now a major, gripped his hand firmly. "I never properly thanked you for what you did that day, Sergeant. My men and I wouldn't be here if not for your ingenuity and courage." Williams smiled. "Just applying what I knew, sir. Any decent mechanic would have done the same." "That's not true, and you know it," Mitchell replied seriously. "What you did was extraordinary, and it's changed how many of us think about knowledge and expertise in warfare. The lessons you've taught us will outlast this conflict." In the final weeks of the war in Europe, Williams continued to serve with distinction, applying his technical knowledge to the challenges of operating armor in the varied terrain of Germany. When victory in Europe was declared on May 8, 1945, the 761st Tank Battalion was deep in German territory, having advanced further than many had believed possible for an African-American unit at the war's outset. During the occupation period that followed, Williams was tasked with developing methods for adapting the battalion's vehicles to peacekeeping and reconstruction operations. His innovative approaches to using tank recovery vehicles for clearing rubble and repairing damaged infrastructure earned additional commendations. In July 1945, Williams received orders to return to the United States as part of a technical advisory group being assembled to prepare for the anticipated invasion of mainland Japan. While packing his few personal belongings, he was surprised to receive a visit from General Harrington. "I wanted to personally inform you of some news, Sergeant," Harrington said, after they had exchanged greetings. "The advisory group you're joining will be working directly with the Armored Force School at Fort Knox. Your experiences and innovations will be incorporated into training programs for future generations of American tankers." Williams was momentarily speechless. "Sir, I'm honored, but are you certain the school is ready for someone like me in that role?" Harrington understood the unspoken question. "The Army is changing, Williams. Too slowly in many ways, but changing nonetheless. Your achievements have helped accelerate that change." He extended his hand. "It's been a privilege serving with you." "The privilege has been mine, sir," Williams replied sincerely. As it happened, the war ended before Williams could implement his role at the Armored Force School. The Japanese surrender in August 1945 eliminated the need for the invasion preparations. Nevertheless, his technical innovations had already been documented and incorporated into training materials that would influence American armored doctrine for years to come. Williams was honorably discharged from the Army in October 1945, returning to his hometown in Georgia with a Bronze Star, multiple commendations, and a wealth of experience that transcended his pre-war life. Like many veterans, he found the transition to civilian life challenging, particularly given the persistence of segregation and discrimination in the post-war South. Yet the recognition he had received during the war opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Using the technical knowledge he had expanded during his military service, Williams established a successful mechanical repair business that eventually grew to include agricultural equipment modifications based on the principles he had applied on European battlefields. In 1948, Williams was invited to serve as a consultant to the newly integrated armed forces, providing insights on technical training and maintenance procedures. His experiences became a case study in how diverse knowledge backgrounds could strengthen military capabilities, a principle that would gain increasing recognition in subsequent decades. Perhaps most significantly, the story of how Williams's farm-derived knowledge saved American tanks and lives became part of the narrative, supporting the case for military integration. When President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981 in July 1948, mandating equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed forces, stories like Williams's provided compelling evidence of the contributions African American service members had made and could continue to make in an integrated military. In the years that followed, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, Williams occasionally spoke at events, sharing his wartime experiences and the lessons he had learned about the value of diverse knowledge and perspectives. Though never comfortable in the spotlight, he recognized the importance of his story in challenging stereotypes and expanding opportunities for others. By the time Williams passed away in 1982 at the age of 70, the military he had served in had been transformed. African Americans had risen to the highest ranks, and the principle that talent and expertise should be recognized regardless of background had been firmly established, if not always perfectly implemented. At his funeral, attended by former comrades including several who had become general officers, one of the eulogists summarized Williams' legacy. Isaiah Williams showed us that knowledge is valuable regardless of its source. The expertise he developed fixing tractors in Georgia saved American lives in France. In doing so, he taught the Army and America a lesson about recognizing and respecting talent wherever it appears. That lesson remains as vital today as it was when Isaiah was rescuing tanks under fire. Today, the story of Technical Sergeant Isaiah Williams and the innovations he developed based on his farm experience is taught at military technical schools and engineering programs. His techniques for adapting to difficult terrain and improvising solutions with limited resources remain relevant in modern warfare, and the principle he embodied, that diverse backgrounds and knowledge bases strengthen military capabilities, has become a cornerstone of contemporary military thinking. The modest mechanic from Georgia who never sought the spotlight would likely be surprised by his lasting impact. Yet through his quiet competence, innovative thinking, and courage under fire, Isaiah Williams changed not just how the Army approached technical challenges, but how it viewed the contributions of African American service members, helping to pave the way for the integrated, talent-focused military of today. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.